Keeper of the Lost Cities, Everblaze, Chapter 17. What does red mean? Sophie asked, not sure if she should scream or flail or run into the nearest bathroom and wash her hands with an entire bar of soap. It means you need to get to the healing center. Does Elwyn keep piquetine on hand? I don't know what that is. Lady Cadence sprinkled the silver powder on her own hands and rubbed it in. It's an acid, second in strength only to alkahest, so it should be strong enough to remove the arrow mark. Honestly, have you learned nothing in alchemy? Alchemy had been Sophie's worst subject, by far, and she'd barely managed a passing grade. But she did remember that alkahest was the universal solvent, able to dissolve anything, wood, metal, flesh. What's arrow mark? She said, more than a little afraid of the answer. Lady Cadence held her non-glowing hands up to sniff them. Something I'm very thankful not to have on me. It won't hurt you, not by itself at least, she added when she noticed the way Sophie started to tremble. But you must get rid of it quickly. Did anyone else handle the devices besides you? Alden and Keefe, and Jurek at the sanctuary, and maybe some of the counselors. Plus it was tangled in Sylvanie's tail, so I'm sure it touched her. Lady Cadence rubbed her temples. They'll all have to get tested. She handed Sophie the vial of powder. Have them sprinkle this on their skin. Anywhere that glows red has to be purged. And if you need more, let me know. I have plenty of revel dust in my supplies. Revel dust? Sophie repeated, trying not to think about the word purged. It's a special type of spore that reacts to various ogre enzymes. It doesn't get rid of them, but it'll let you know when they're there. Sophie studied her glowing hands. How come Alden and Sandor didn't know about this stuff? Because they never asked. And most of the reports I sent to council seemed to vanish into some sort of void, never to be mentioned again. I sent them all kinds of information about what I discovered in the true nature of ogre technology. For instance, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a necklace with a round silver pendant. This is a mark chain. King Dimitar, the ogre's supreme leader, gave it to me when he finally granted my residency in their capital, which was no easy feat, I can assure you. He told me I had to wear it all the time if I wanted to remain safe, and for years I thought it was a gadget, like the registry pendants we wear, but I was wrong. She rubbed her fingers around the edge of the sphere and held out her hand. After a few seconds, her fingertip glowed green. That's the essence seal reacting with the revel dust still on my hands, she explained. Sophie shook her head, struggling to keep all the weird names straight. What does that have to do with arrow mark? Because they're both enzymes. That's the ogre's true brilliance. Their technology is actually quite simplistic, but their biochemistry, I had no idea until I knocked over a vat of revel dust while I was working, and walked through the cloud it created. My skin glowed bright green everywhere. Everywhere my pendant had touched me, and I realized that the mark chain is actually an ecosystem, a tiny, self-sustaining world of microorganisms. She dangled the silver pendant in front of Sophie's face, pointing to the nearly microscopic black holes that covered the outside like tiny pinpricks. Essence seal is an enzyme secreted by the colony of microorganisms living inside this sphere. As elves, we can't see the enzyme, smell it, or taste it without revel dust. But the ogres can. And if they don't detect it on someone walking through their city, they know they're dealing with an intruder. Sophie frowned at her glowing red fingers. If the scent is so strong, why didn't Sandor notice it? Goblins are the ogre's greatest enemies, aside from humans. Of course, their defenses mechanisms evade goblin detection. The fact that elves can't see or smell them is just a bonus. Sophie had to agree with the ogre's logic, though once again she found herself wishing that Sandor's goblin super senses were a lot more super. So then, what does the arrow mark on the tracker do? She asked, bracing for the worst possible answer. Still, nothing could have prepared her. Lady Cadence held her green fingers next to Sophie's red ones. Green would mean it's a tracker, Sophie. Red means it's a homing device. all of their weapons, and they do have them, though they're supposed to be for defense only, use Aramark as their targeting systems. As long as they lock out of the enzyme, they're guaranteed a direct hit. "You're sure, Lady Cadence," said Picotine, Elwyn asked, searching the shelves of tiny bottles that he had lined up in the largest wall in the healing center. He cringed when Sophie nodded, removing his iridescent spectacles and resting them on his forehead, amidst his wild dark hair. "Well then, I'm going to have to prep your skin." Nothing about that sentence sounded good. "Relax, Foster," Keith said, as he flopped back in the bed across from her. "I swear I'm feeling more stress vibes from you than Gigantor over there." He pointed to Elwyn's office, where Sandor was pacing back and forth, using his triangular-shaped gadget to convey the newest information to the captain of his army. The thin wall that separated the office from the larger treatment area muffled most of the conversation, but Sophie could still hear the trembling in Sandor's squeaky voice. "I look like I've been dipped in foxfire," Keith said, wiggling his red glowing fingers. Do you think Dame Elena would give me extra credit if I told her I did this for school spirit?" "I think Dame Elena's more worried that we might have gotten Aramark everywhere else," Sophie told him. The entire Foxfire campus was currently being swept with Lady Cadence's supply of Revel Dust, even though Lady Cadence had assured Dame Elena that the ogre enzymes only transferred when they were freshly released, like how ink only smears when it's wet, and only stuck to living skin through direct contact with the Aramark's source. Sophie, meanwhile, was much more concerned about getting in touch with Alden, so he could arrange for Sylvanie to get treated. Once again, Alden was out of range. Same with Jurek and Grady. Keith kicked the edge of Sophie's mattress, making Bullhorn, Elwyn's pet banshee, who'd been sleeping under her bed, streak across the room with an angry hiss. "If you keep squeezing your reporter that tight, you're going to crush it." Sophie loosened her grip and took a deep, calming breath. It didn't help. "Why aren't they answering?" she asked, fighting the urge to fling the useless gadget across the room. "And how can you be so calm? There could be an ogre weapon aimed at us right this second, or at Sylvanie, or at Alden, or the counselors. And if they lock onto this," she held out her glowing fingers, "they can't miss." "Yeah, but if they did that, they'd be starting a war," Keith reminded her. "A war they'd lose, by the way," Elwyn chimed in. "Don't be fooled by our peaceful methods, Sophie. If anyone is foolish enough to attack, we have ways to shut them down, quickly. And the ogres know that. We've made all the intelligent species know it. Why do you think they signed our treaties?" He sounded so sure, and Sophie almost believed him. But she doubted the rebels or the ogres or whoever had been putting the homing device on Sylvanie would have gone to so much trouble if they weren't willing to pull the trigger. "I think it's high time we get rid of that nasty stuff, don't you?" Owen asked, placing the flat silver bowl in each of their laps and warning them not to spill. Sophie gagged when she caught a whiff of the clear liquid inside. "Yeah, trust me, you don't want to know what that is," Ellen told her. "Just soak your hands in there until I tell you to stop. Oh, and plan on it feeling strange." "Strange how?" Sophie asked as she dunked her hands in the bowl. But then she knew what he meant, because the liquid seeped into her skin with equal parts fire and ice. It didn't hurt, but it didn't feel good either. Mostly it made her sweat and shiver and itch like crazy. "Just hang in for 10 more seconds," Elwyn said, starting to count down. 10 seconds had never felt so slow, and when he finally got to 1, Sophie couldn't pull her hands out fast enough. Elwyn took their silver bowls away and handed them each a green, silky cloth. "Whoa," Keith whispered, dropping the towel into his lap. He clapped his hands a few times and then pressed them to his face. "It's like I know my hands are touching me, but I can't feel them doing it." Sophie was just as numb, though she didn't find it nearly as entertaining. Doctors only numbed someone if they were preparing them for pain. "What's that?" she asked, as Owen pulled 2 small red vials out of the satchel that he always wore across his shoulders. "Last step. It won't hurt, I promise." Sophie stared at the hopping jackalopes on Elwyn's tunic and reminded herself that she trusted him as he positioned her arms so that they were straight out on the floor. It'll be less messy this way, he explained, which wasn't nearly as reassuring as he wanted it to be. And don't freak out when you see what this does. It'll be over in a second. Sophie had to force herself to hold still as Owen poured the thin red liquid onto her hands. She couldn't feel the shiny fluid as it covered her palms, but that didn't make it any less horrifying when the top layers of her skin shriveled up and melted, dripping onto the floor in a slimy puddle of peach goo. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, making everyone gag as Owen wrapped their hands in purple wet cloths. "That might be the creepiest thing I've ever done," Keith said quietly, staring at his soggy purple dressings. "I mean, it was also awesome, but dude, you should warn a guy before you melt his skin off." Sophie hated that Alden had to endure the same process, and Jurek, and... "Oh no," she mumbled, struggling to grab her imparter with her purple mummy hands. "They can't do that to Sylvanie. She'll be traumatized for months." "Hey, easy," Owen said, gently pinning her shoulders. "You need to finish your treatment or it won't heal right, and I'm sure they'll sedate Sylvanie. I actually thought about doing that for you, but I know how you feel about sedatives, and I might have volunteered to be knocked out," Keith interrupted. "Even if it meant spending the night in school?" Owen asked. "Oh, a slumber party. Definitely count me in for that." "Yeah, well, somehow I doubt your parents would have wanted that, which was the other reason I kept you awake." "You must not know my parents very well. They're always happy to be rid of me," Keith said with a smile, but Sophie knew him too well to buy it. Owen must have noticed too, because he dropped the subject. "Huh," he said as he unwrapped Sophie's hands. "I thought for sure this would have been gone." He traced his fingers along the star-shaped scarf in the black swan's healing. "It must sink too deep," she said as Owen snapped his fingers to form an orange sphere right around the scar. He squinted through his iridescent spectacles, turning her hand from side to side. "But that doesn't make sense." "That's Foster's trademark," Keith reminded him. "Yes, I suppose it is." Owen flashed a green orb instead, frowning when he noticed her wrist. "Why didn't you tell me you had a burn?" "It's not a burn, it's a bruise," Sophie corrected. "I just used the wrong ointment to treat it and made it worse. And before you give me a lecture, I didn't come to see you because it wasn't a big deal. My skin just got a little twisted when someone squeezed my wrist." "Whoa, wait a second. Who was squeezing you?" Keith asked. "Give me their name and I'll punish them, Sensen style." "Nobody needs punishing," Sophie insisted. "If anything, it was my fault. I know how unstable Brent is. I should have been more careful." "You definitely do need to be more careful," Owen agreed, as he searched through his satchel. "But I also think it would be wise of you to stay away from him. And either way, you must always come to see me when you have an injury." Okay. No need to shout." Sophie rubbed her ringing ears. Owen gave her a stern glare as he took her hand and rubbed the purple salve on her wound. Instantly, the cooling tingles eased the ache, and the redness vanished. "What ointment is that?" she said, asking, wanting to remember the name. "It's called Get Your Butt to the Healing Center Next Time. Or, just don't have a next time," Keith jumped in. "Though we all know that probably won't happen." He pointed to the picture of Sophie in her humiliating opening ceremony's mastodon costume hanging over her bed. Owen added the tally boards so to keep track of how many times you visited. "I should add one for you too, Keith," Owen told her. "You're starting to become quite the regular around here." "I guess that's the downside of hanging out with the Queen of Mystery over here. But don't worry, it's worth it." Sophie forced a smile, knowing he was only teasing. But he was right. Since Keith had been helping her, he'd had his skin melted off, gotten several broken ribs, and almost died. And Dex had been just as unlucky. Being her friend was dangerous, but she'd worry about that later. First, she needed to warn someone about the ogre enzymes, and with Alden, Jurek, and Grady still not responding to her hails, she could only think of one other person who might be able to help. She'd promised herself, and Grady, that she'd only turn to him for the most extreme emergencies, since his duties as a counselor would always come first. But she knew from her past experiences that sometimes she had to bend a few rules. But having Sylvanie under threat of attack had to fall into that category. She grabbed her importer, wishing her hands weren't shaking, as she held the silver, sleek square up to her lips and whispered, "Show me Counselor Tarek."